My name is Maggie. Mr. Fleming asked me to make a video on how to properly do the notes for CP biology, and I was more than happy to take the opportunity. By the end of this video, I'm going to try and keep it short and sweet, but by the end, you should be able to have something like this. First priority, get it done when it's assigned so that you don't have to do it later on and go to Mr. Fleming and be like, oh, so I had like 4 other assignments for like 3 different classes and I couldn't get to do it, my homework, and so now I'm behind. And he's not going to baby you. Mr. Fleming gives you the homework a week in advance. There's no reason for you to not do it. There's always time for you to finish your homework, no matter if you're in a different class or if you're at home. And when you first start it, you're going to want to write the chapter, the section, and then the title of the section on the top of the page, along with your name, the date, and whichever class period you're in. Next, you're going to want to write your summary, which is the longest part of the entire homework process, but if you do it right, then it gets done fast and then you learn. So, first thing I'm going to say, when you see these keys next to this bolded text, you don't have to write the questions. This bolded text answers those questions. Now, no matter if there's one of these in an entire section or 2 or 8, you're going to want to write all of them. Now, what I usually do is I would skim through the pages, like this one I'm doing, chapter 4.3. I skim through the chapter and the section first to see what I'm going to learn about, and then as I'm writing my notes, I read through the paragraphs and write what I find is important. Now, that may lead you to have longer pages than you probably want to, but it also gives you a lot more information and it really helps. I always say to write the vocabulary word and then the definition that follows it in the text, and then you're going to also want to write these bolded texts here because they're important. These are highlighted and these are bolded for a reason because they are important. I would include some examples in your text. It's going to help you fill up more space, and then secondly, it's going to give you something to look back on and to think about when you're writing it, and if you have trouble during something, you can always consult your example that you have to help you remember the material easy. For the figures here, just read them and then look at the pictures because they can really help. They provide information. They can answer some of the questions at the end of the sections because sometimes they're not directly mentioned in the full text, they're in the figures. So 100% read those. Always write what you think is important, write examples, write analogies. There's some like here for the pioneer species, it says they were named after rugged human pioneers. If that would help you learn it, write it down. If it doesn't help you learn it, I would still suggest writing it down because it's an analogy and you can always think back to it. These vocabulary word origin things, you don't really need necessarily have to add that to your thing. It's more so there to help explain to you what the word itself means. But if you think it would help you, please don't hesitate to write that down. Mr. Fleming's rules are to fill up at least 2/3 of a page or more. Don't fill up less than that. Don't fill up just half a page. He does not like that. You need to do what he tells you to do. And when you're doing these questions at the end of the sections, you're going to want to always do this last question. Even if you don't want to because it says write an essay or write a paragraph, do this problem. It could be anything, but you need to do it because it's there for a reason and he wants you to do it because it's going to help you learn. These review and explain questions, sometimes you're going to have trouble answering them, but most of the time these questions are cited in the text somewhere. But I don't suggest just going back and writing exactly what the text says because that's not what Mr. Fleming wants you to do and it's not what the book wants you to do. What the book wants you to do is to write it in your own words and explain it without going back into the text. That's also what Mr. Fleming wants. He expects you to know how to answer these questions without consulting the text backwards because you should have read it and you should understand it before you move on to these questions. So the order of it is summary, vocab, and then questions. And it is required, you have to write the question down. No matter how long it is, write it down. Mr. Fleming will get on you and he'll take off points if you don't write down the question. First couple notes that you're going to take, you may get things wrong, you may not have enough information, you may forget to write a question, you may skip a question, you might forget a vocabulary word. That's fine, but you don't want that to happen throughout the year. You always want to write anything that's related to, let's say, a vocab word in one paragraph. Like this one doesn't have a vocab word in it, but there's still probably informational text in here that you could add to your notes that'll help you later on. Here, primary succession begins in an area with no remnants of an older community. An example would be glaciers have an effect of leaving only exposed bare rock behind them. See, that's a good 2, maybe 3 sentences. You don't want to write directly out of the book. For the definitions when you're writing your vocabulary, it's good to usually use the text that's here. If you really truly don't feel like the definition in the actual section is not thorough enough for you, you can go to the glossary and look it up. I personally never used the glossary once during the year, and I always knew what everything meant. So it really depends. If you need to find something, like Mr. Fleming said something in class that would be in one section and you're looking for it and you can't find it, use the index. It is your best friend. Use the glossary if you need it. It is also your best friend. Doing these sections in class will really help you with your understanding of what you're learning. It's really important that you do these because these will help you on the test. Like if you have a test one day, you can go back and read your notes that you took from the book and they'll give you a thorough explanation, and then any notes that you took during class. If these are not helping you and your notes that you take in class are not helping you either, I 100% suggest going to his website and printing out the note guides for the current chapter and section that you are on and doing those in your own time, or bring them to class and do them there, because they will really, it'll boost your knowledge on what's going on by giving you a different explanation that's following the book, and then you have your notes that you wrote yourself. So, recap, my pro tips are: you should always write the bolded statements and write and include your vocab. Do it in your own words most of the time. For the vocabulary, you can write the actual sentence itself. That's usually what I do. But most other things, except for the bold text, I write in my own words. Something that you're probably going to hear Mr. Fleming say multiple times this year is do your homework actively and not passively. Doing your homework actively means you're really engrossed in trying to learn what he assigned to you. Doing it passively means you just skim through it, write down random things, and rush through it, and you don't actually try to absorb the material and actually try to learn it, and you rely on in-class lectures and reviews right before the test. Include examples, just like these figures, like a small summary about what's going on in these pictures and these figure descriptions. They can really help you out. The questions will relate to what's going on in this section, so you can always consult back to it. For another thing, always do the last question. Even if you don't want to, you need to do it. Leaving it blank will get you points taken off, and it will really hurt your homework grade. So even if you really don't want to do it, at least try. These questions are for you to try. They're not graded for correction. It's mainly just get them done, know what you did, and if you have any questions whatsoever, ask Mr. Fleming. He will be more than happy to answer them for you. Always go to him if you have any concerns about what you're learning, or if you, let's say, don't understand something that you did on the homework, you can ask him. I'm sure he would really enjoy having that conversation with you on how to do it properly and if you did it or did it wrong. That's pretty much it. This was a very short video. I really hope that this description helped. I'll put a more in-depth description on the actual notes itself at the end of this video with the finished product. I hope that it really helps, and yeah, thank you for watching. Bye-bye! So here's the finished product. This is after I skimmed through the section, went back, and then started to write down things I found important. I started off with this sentence with the ecological succession and then what this says here. Then I proceeded to write this bolded text, and then I began to move downwards, and through these paragraphs I wrote some examples. I wrote about the glaciers, I wrote about primary succession, I wrote about the pioneer species, why they're named that. I wrote about this sentence here with the people creating settlements and diversifying into other things. I wrote about the secondary succession, the rapidly growing vegetation and activities, human activities. I wrote about every organism changes the environment. That's very important because that can go into other sections in this book that you may or may not do. So I would always include at least 1 or 2 sentences from every paragraph. Then I wrote about, I wrote this bolded quote. I wrote about climax communities. I wrote about this bolded paragraph, I wrote why that happens with the clearing and farming. I wrote some of this about the figure, and then I skimmed through and wrote a couple more examples. And then I jotted down my vocab using the in-text from the book itself, not from the glossary. And then I went on the back, and I didn't do the actual questions, but you basically would write the question out. Underneath it, you would write the answer, write the question, write the answer, write the question, write the answer, and you do that for all of these. And then, of course, you have your formatting. I would suggest highlighting your vocabulary so it's easier to see. I also do not suggest writing this in pen, because if you screw up, then it can become a disaster, because you want them to be as neat as possible for when you go back to read them again. These are especially helpful for studying for tests. Read through them, since it's a short summary of an entire section in a chapter. Read through that. It'll give you a brief synopsis of what happened. Then you'll go through, if you did the note guides, then good for you. You can read over those too. That'll give you more. Be sure to take some notes in class and do your homework actively, not passively. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed. Hope this helps, and goodbye.